thank T-Rex and Women Cups for letting us speak today. I actually found out about Women Cups back at South by Southwest in Vegas about 6 years ago. Someone named Dave Blankenship, who some of you might know, told me about Women Cups, and this is before I ever lived in St. Louis, and so I'm just really excited and pleased to be here with you this morning. I'm Caroline Fan. I'm founder of Early. It's a very early stage, pun intended, nonprofit startup that focuses on youth leadership empowerment.
I'm Noor Rahman. I'm interning with Carolyn on this nonprofit.
So, Early stands for Education, Advocacy, Representation, and Leadership for Youth. So I was actually a union and political organizer. Raise your hands if any of you have ever met an Asian American union organizer. No one? Okay, so I might be the first Asian American union organizer you've ever met. That's partially why I started this organization, because in a lot of the jobs I held, whether it was as a union political organizer or consulting for startups, I was the only person who looked like me in the room. And I wanted to make sure, I still want to make sure that we have a pipeline of youth leaders coming up who can lead in the classroom, in the boardroom, or in the State House. Coincidentally, we have no Asian Americans in the State House. So, Early endeavors to develop leadership and advocacy skills amongst underserved youth in Missouri, particularly in the Asian Pacific American community. We believe that empowerment starts with youth, and that providing young people the tools to advocate for our community will build a better Missouri. Nora, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience and how you joined me on this journey?
Sure. So I actually grew up in St. Louis. I went to high school here. And a couple things I've worked on that I met Caroline through were I worked for the Wesley Bell for St. Louis County Prosecutor campaign last year, and now I live in Texas, so down there I worked for the Beto for Senate campaign, and that's how I kind of got involved with Caroline in this work that she's doing.
Yeah, last winter we were at Wesley Bell swearing in, and I said, Nora, when you were in high school, did you ever have any kind of leadership classes? And she was like, no. I was like, well, next summer, do you want to help me do some of this stuff? So we had our first event this past Saturday, and we had about 30 people, including youth, and they're clamoring for more. So I want to talk about the model and kind of how I came about with this idea. So in the Asian American Pacific Islander community, right, voters don't see anyone who looks like them, which leads to really low voter registration and participation rates. And then candidates don't feel engaged either by parties, candidates, or, citizens don't feel engaged by candidates or elected officials. And then, therefore, community members don't run for office, and then we go back to voters don't see anyone who looks like them. That's about voter apathy, but you can apply that to any kind of field. When I was growing up in Chicago, I didn't see any Asian American candidates, I didn't see any Asian American congresspeople, and so I never thought that that was a feasible career path. Kind of the same way that a lot of people grow up and they don't see doctors, engineers, startup founders who look like them, so they never consider that as a career path. So the problem is
that the AAPI community feels disengaged, and it's disengaged from civic engagement. And a couple of reasons for this is because a lot of the parents of these children that were trying to get involved in things like this are really focused on their kids' extracurriculars and job prospects, so they kind of steer away from the more partisan types of involvement that they could get involved with. A lot of them have English as a second language, so they don't feel really comfortable with government procedures, and this leads to a lack of role models for these young kids, which is going to contribute to them having really low rates of voter turnout and also having a lot less self-confidence than their peers.
So it's not just about lack of self-confidence, it's also that you find fewer Asian Americans who are leaders, CEOs, candidates, but it starts when folks are really young. So this is a study that was done for 30 years. It's a longitudinal study of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders across the United States. And it was from NYU, Michigan. Very interesting. They found that African American youth, African American males, up here actually have the highest rates of self-confidence, and then Asian American females to the right, and then Asian American males just slightly ahead of them have the lowest rates of self-confidence. And so this is some of what we want to address. I will tell you, 18 years ago, I never would have been up here in front of you with a microphone. I was deathly afraid of public speaking, but I kind of had to get over that through all my advocacy for the community.
So our model and theory of change, we have 3 planks on how we want this to work. First off, that we want it to be youth-centered. Secondly, that we wanted to focus on early empowerment. And lastly, that we're trying to create the role models of tomorrow. So the reason why we focus on youth is because in the Asian American communities, the youth are often the translators for their elders, and they're the ones who can mobilize them to take action if they can influence them on something that they feel is important. Secondly, if we build this with youth, we're encouraging self-confidence at a really young age, and that's going to translate into creating role models for the future.
It's true. I asked Nora when she started this internship, she thought she would be doing so many presentations, and she said no. So here are some of our upcoming events on September 21st, and this is also part of the model. The idea is we'll have a large group training. So September 21st at WashU, we're doing a giant census training because the census is also about representation and making sure that our community gets counted. It's open to everyone, however, and we'll also talk about how you can get census jobs. And then it'll be followed by small group peer groups where they can delve into this issue or other issues more in depth. They'll be moderated by slightly older folks, college and grad school students, and then that will be followed by one-on-one mentorship meetings with role models in different fields. And so we'll repeat that model every kind of quarter. And culminating in a summer internship where hopefully next summer we'll have more Noras.
So the reason that we're focusing on the Asian American community in St. Louis is because they're a really largely ignored voting bloc. If you look at the data from the census, you can see that in specific townships, the Asian American community has nearly doubled and it's continuing to grow at really rapid rates. So they are a voting bloc that we can focus on and really encourage them to participate and become more visible in St. Louis.
So how many of you during the 2016 election, which all of us have been told is the most important election of our lifetimes, got emails, calls, got bothered to go vote? Many of us, right? Well, so 71% of Asian Americans across the country received no voter contact about 2016, which to many of you might sound like heaven. But what that means is that a lot of campaigns then don't think we have a voice, don't think that we have any power, and don't think that we really make much of a contribution. So that's actually a problem in terms of power and having a seat at the table. The reason that I started this group is actually in Missouri, there are no statewide Asian American organizations that advocate for the community. That's a gigantic gap. I wanted to talk really quickly about my track record and what I've done prior to this that qualifies me. So nationally, I was the youngest endorsements chair of a national political action committee that helped about 100 candidates, including 20 women, some of whom you might be familiar with, Kamala Harris, Mazie Hirono, Tammy Duckworth, and we doubled the number of Asian Americans in Congress. Alongside that, I also started a campaign fellows program. I was co-founder, because a big problem is not only do we not have Asian Americans in elected office, we don't have Asian Americans who know how to run political campaigns. And then I've also led mentorship, leadership, and professional development trainings for over 1,200 people. Locally, I was president of an organization here in the Asian American community, and I put together the first ever White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, the first forum here in Missouri back in 2016. On a Saturday morning, we had about 100 leaders attending from across the state, from Kansas City, from the Ozarks, and from here locally, and we had 5 government agencies. And the thing that was unique about this was the government agencies came to our community, and this never happens. It never happens that the government comes to our community and says, what do you guys want? What do you need? Furthermore, here are resources that are culturally competent, that are in the languages that you read and speak. So that was really big for our community. And then this year in May, which is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, I put together the first ever APAM celebration at City Hall. So APAM's been celebrated since 1972 nationally, and we never recognized it in St. Louis until this year. So accompanying that, I got a Board of Aldermen's resolution and a mayoral proclamation. And I guess we're here at the Q&A section. So this is totally non-for-profit, and I should say that I am currently self-funding it. Most people tend to self-fund startups that are going to make money. I don't know that this is ever going to make money, but I'm trying to diversify funding streams through applying to grants. Questions from the audience? Yes, back there.
just wait for the mic so we can pick you up on camera here.
Hi, my name's Rob, and I'm an Asian Pacific Islander from the Republic of Palau. I think what you guys are doing is super awesome. It's really important. On the grant side, I know that you're probably wanting to diversify the revenue. Are there grants available right now on a federal level that you qualify for?
So at the federal level, I think that there's some workforce grants over at the DOL. My experience with federal grant making is that it's a really long process. So first you have to apply to be a federal contractor, and that takes a while. And then it's just kind of time consuming. So that's something to consider down the line. First, when I stand, now that I'm standing this up, I want to make sure that we have individual donors and then corporate and foundation donors, because that cycle is a little bit faster. Also, thank you for being here. I think, folks, who in the room actually knows where Palau is? One guy, well, you probably know where Palau is, so thank you for representing the PI side of the AAPI equation.
Thank you.
Do you have a question?
I have a question. So you mentioned the census and mentoring. What other activities are you hoping to incorporate in your profile?
So the census is hugely important. Census 2020 is around the corner. I actually worked for Census 2010. I was a field operations supervisor, and I started out in recruitment, so I made sure in Manhattan, New York, that we had people who spoke 40 languages in our office. Here in St. Louis, I'm not sure how many people spoke how many languages last time, but for each person who doesn't get counted by the census, our state loses an average of $19,000. So that's money we could be using for our roads, our terrible, terrible roads, our hospitals, and our schools. So that's a big component of the next year and a half, because we want to make sure that not just, I'm Chinese American, nor is Pakistani American. I'm going to an event on September 1st with the Bhutanese community, right? It was a shock to me that there are 2,000 Bhutanese here in St. Louis. We want to make sure all communities are counted. I'm working with Jeffrey from Vitendo for Africa to make sure that that community is counted. A lot of our communities are considered hard to count because of language barriers, because we rent. Because, in general, people are kind of suspicious when the government knocks at their door and says, hi, we want to know your name, we want to know who lives with you, how many people live here, right? So that's something that has continued under this current climate. In addition to that, I hope to place interns both with our organization in high school and in college in different jobs, whether that's startups, whether that's nonprofits, maybe some political campaigns. Even though the organization is itself nonpartisan, these are kind of untraditional things that our community doesn't look at as career paths. When I was growing up, I was told that there were 5 acceptable jobs. I could be a doctor, I could be a lawyer, I could be an engineer, I could be an architect, and I forget the 5th one. But I became a union organizer, so that was a really fun conversation to have with my folks.
Great presentation, by the way. It was real clear and to the point. For politics, can you tap Emily's list? What about putting together your own PAC? Also, I know that there are Asian chambers of commerce in various places too. I'm not sure if there's one in St. Louis, or maybe you could start one.
So Early is a 501c3 non-partisan organization. Separate from Early, I am in conversations with people about starting a chapter of our national PAC here, and then also about starting a C4, which is kind of the more political arm of a C3 that allows you to do voter guides. And I also want to shout out my friend Brett Narayan, who is the first Asian American alderman in the city of St. Louis, who was a big part of our May events. And then Emily's list, at the national level, we co-endorse a lot of candidates with the PAC, and I'm just trying to separate everything out.
'Cause it sounds like you might have a political consulting business, which could be making your money And the early is a foundation arm of that.
I have done political consulting, so I've run campaigns here, and then I ran an independent expenditure in Nevada in 2016. I'm really passionate about politics, but more than that, I'm really passionate about building up our youth. So, we have a lot of folks who go into the workplace and they think, okay, as long as I get really good grades, or as long as I get a job at a prestigious, business, then I'll be fine. And then they find themselves hitting kind of middle management and not being able to break through. And that's fine and all, but I think that there's a potential for our community to be way more represented and way more powerful. And so that's what I'm really, really interested in, is finding and nurturing our youth so that they can go and do whatever, right? The skills of public speaking, the skills of being able to run a voter registration drive, present to people, you need that in business, you need that in the classroom. And actually, here's another statistic, Asian American women have the lowest rates of tenure proportionally, right? So they're not seen as leaders. And I think part of that is what society says to us, right? And we, up until pretty much 5 years ago, on TV, on movies, had no representation. Or it was like really two-dimensional representation. Like when I was growing up, my role models on TV were Connie Chung and Apu. Those were the only two Asian American that we saw. And Apu is literally two-dimensional. He is not actually three-dimensional, right? So I want folks to succeed in all fields, right? And I also think that we don't take chances, partially because our parents come here as immigrants, as refugees. They just want us to do well and have a good life. And every point in my career, I've taken the risky path, right? I quit my job at City Hall, which had really great benefits, to run and do this for no money. And I'm putting my own money into it, but that's how much I believe in it, because I think that our community desperately, desperately, desperately needs representation and models of leadership that we don't unfortunately currently have, particularly in the state of Missouri.
Our go-to question is always, what can the community do for you? We've touched on that.
Thank you. So looking for introductions in Kansas City and mid-Missouri. I have a few contacts who are AAPI who are both on my board and on the advisory board out there. I'm actually going to Kansas City the 22nd to the 25th. Would love to talk to people. They don't have to be Asian American. I'm just, also trying to get folks in our state activated around census, because every time I call an organization here, not just in our community, by the way, they're like, oh, you're the first person to ask me what we're doing around the census. And this just bugs me because I want to make sure that our state has the resources, but also the representation, because last time around, we lost a congressional seat, and Illinois also lost a congressional seat. But the difference is the Illinois legislature appropriated $29 million for census outreach and education. And our legislature appropriated $500,000 just for 1 year. So that's a lot to make up. Spread the word. We have a Facebook and a Twitter, which is...
It's early. So our Twitter is B_earlyMO, and then our Facebook is just early in all caps.
I'm having conversations with some philanthropists. A friend of mine has promised a matching grant, so that's always something that donors like to hear, is that their money is going to go further. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thanks, Angel. Also, I wanted to give her a shout out. She's actually driving to college on Friday, so